welcome to the Phenomenal Teacher Show. Our guest today is Nuria Diana, who is the founder of iSchool for the Future and a compassionate innovator. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Diana.
I'd like to start off by asking you, who was your favorite teacher growing up and what made them special to you?
Yeah, and I know that's your always opening question. And before coming to this podcast, I was actually thinking, what am I going to tell Diana when she asks me that question? And I was thinking, I was really digging hard, and I was thinking, I think my story is a little different. And I wasn't as fortunate when I was a little kid or a kid in the school to have a really memorable teacher that really, I can say, inspired me. I actually had a pretty dramatic experience as a little child. And I remember in the first and second grade, I had a teacher who was apparently very, very abusive, both verbally and physically towards kids. I don't think she was towards to me, but the thing is that completely erased my early childhood memories of school. I guess because it's a protective mechanism of our human psychology, that's how it works. But now I am reliving this time as a kid when I actually get to work with some of the most brilliant and phenomenal teachers. And I'm seeing this and giving this opportunity to my kids to experience it. And I'm just loving it. And sometimes I look at them and I feel like, I want to be in your classroom. You are the teacher that I wanted always to have. So and it just kind of makes me emotional. And sometimes I think maybe the part of the reason why I started the iSchool was to deal with that trauma of my early childhood and kind of resolve it and to bring in the teachers that I've never had in my life before. So there are a number of phenomenal teachers that I've met in the past 7 years. And some of them are my favorite teachers still, and they still inspire me.
So touching on that just a little bit further, because I want to understand, like, what is your definition of a phenomenal teacher? You work with so many teachers, and how did you separate it? How do you know right away, what that is a phenomenal teacher?
Right. I guess partly at the time when I first kind of started my journey as an educator, because I became an education entrepreneur, as I call myself, only recently, which is like 7-8 years ago. Before, I spent almost 20 years in the corporate and international development sectors as a program manager in high tech and telecom. So it was a very different environment, right? And when my kids came along and they went to kind of became of the school age, I realized that they were missing so much in their education and life. And I kind of, that probably my early childhood drama in my memories bubbled up. And I figured, like, I have to make sure that they have some phenomenal teachers in their lives. And I went out of my way to actually create that environment. And I intuitively knew what the phenomenal teacher is someone who doesn't teach, but who inspires learning, who inspires curiosity. And basically, whenever I do hire the teachers to iSchool, I look for teachers who can ignite that spark during the teaching instruction time, because what happens when the class is over, that's when the learning really starts flourishing. And it goes on for days, even without teachers in the kids' lives. So they keep learning, and there is nothing that can stop them. The parents cannot stop them, and they write to me and they say, "What did you do to my child?" Like, all of a sudden they became so independent. They know what they want. They run around the house. The house is an absolute mess, and they keep creating and doing something and calling themselves innovators and inventors, and just come up with some crazy ideas, like for days, for hours and days after the class is over. And I guess that's what makes the phenomenal teacher to me, is someone who can connect with every child and create that spark that will live on for a long time after their contact with the child.
I love that. That's amazing. So I want to ask you about this growth mindset and how teachers could actually use this within their own classroom with their students.
Right. Well, the growth mindset is not a new concept, and it's not my concept, right? So, and most educators know about that. And it's something that is very important first for us as adults to embrace, so that we can share it with the kids, right? And a lot of times I know that we teach the best what we most need to know and to learn, right? And when we start teaching it, we actually have to start following it, and we have to learn more about it and practice and model it in the classroom, right? And to our kids. Basically, it's kind of when we compare the growth mindset with a fixed mindset, the growth mindset implies that we have unlimited potential. We have unlimited talents and opportunities to grow. And the science backs that concept that our brain is very pliable and very responsive to the environment, to the beliefs, to the brain exercise, right? So the more we engage it, the more we are determined to grow. There is absolutely nothing that can stop that process. Versus with a fixed mindset, and again, a lot of times it's environment driven, right? When people are conditioned to think and believe that what they have is what it is what they have, and this is it for the rest of their lives. And there is absolutely nothing that can change it, because that's what they were born with. And there is absolutely no foundation to believe that way and for it to be that way. But once that mindset gets set in and conditioned in the early age, it becomes very damaging, essentially, for that person, for that life, and for our society.
So then how can we strengthen and build and nurture these connections with our students, like pliable little minds that we're forming as we spend Monday through Friday with them? And now, with COVID, it's virtually and live, a hybrid model, or either like how you and I are doing this right now over Zoom or video conferencing.
Right. Yeah. This is a phenomenal question, Diana, on the Phenomenal Teacher podcast. Very, very aligned with that. Absolutely. So that was kind of my big search. That was the reason why I started iSchool, frankly. As I was kind of looking for answers. And since I was not a professional educator, so I was trying to kind of look back all the way to the history of learning, history of education, to the science of learning. How do our brains work? How does learning happen? What are the best conditions that actually enhance our learning process, capacity, and opportunity? What works, what doesn't, right? And I kind of went all the way back to the history of education, to Socrates and Aristotle, when kind of the first education concepts were born, and went all the way to the current time. And it occurred that to me that about 150 years ago, when the concept of public education was invented, it was an absolutely revolutionary idea at that time, because it was designed for the population at the time when almost no one could read and write. Very few, only the elite, very rich families able to afford the education. So at that time, the public education as a compulsory tool for everybody to learn the basics was designed. And it was brilliant. That completely took the whole humanity to a different level. Now, pretty much everybody in the world can read and write, right? And kind of have that basic literacy skills. But we know we're not living 150 years in the world the way it was 150 years or 200 years ago. And tomorrow, the world is going to be very different from the way it is today. And we're very fast moving towards that direction. So we cannot longer afford to have that conforming system of standardized approach where we just kind of still march toward like along that conveyor line, producing the batches of widgets that are grouped by date of birth, right? So this is the class of 2025 because they were born at this year, and that's why they have to be rated at the same level, and they have to conform to these particular marks and grades without any regard for their true talents. And there was actually a study conducted in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a longitudinal study. You may have heard of it. It was published in the book Breaking Point and Beyond. They actually surveyed and measured at that time about 3,500 kids from all different demographics, different places. So to kind of make it equal, right, or controlled. And they measured them for the genius capacity to see how many of them have the genius potential. And the way the genius was defined is based on the divergent thinking. So meaning like how creatively and how outside the box they can think. And so those were little kids, ages between 3 and 5. And why 3 and 5? Is because they're verbal enough to express themselves and understand what the conversation, but they haven't gone to school yet. So between ages 3 and 5. What percent, Diana, you think out of those kids scored at the kind of genius capacity?
Well, if I recall, I think this was something that I've been exposed to years ago, but I'm not sure if it was the same study. So about like 90 to 100% were all genius, and then they measured like over the years, the more schooling that they received, the smaller percentage of their genius zone was omitted because they are confined to all sorts of rules of why it couldn't happen. So I remember there was this one instance where they gave them a paperclip, and they said, okay, think of all the ways you could use this paperclip. And so they thought of like, a phenomenal number, right? An extraordinary number, the younger they are. But as they aged, it was like harder and harder to figure out useful things or even creative things of how to use this paperclip. So am I right? Is it like a 90 to 100% or something?
You absolutely are right, Diane. You're a phenomenal educator. Teacher. You're absolutely right. 98% of them actually scored at the near genius potential. And then they were measured, and you're absolutely right, they kept measuring them every 5 years. So it's like after elementary school and then high school and then all the way after college. Right? So it was a longitudinal study over 20 years. And at the end, after like they were completely educated after college, there were only 2% left.
That does not surprise me. You know, I feel like, you know, you go to school and everything's like black or white. I mean, maybe there's a gray zone, but actually education is like a rainbow filled with all of these spectrums and variety. But, you know, I feel like as a teacher, you come in with all of these motives and wonderful intentions. And then the system says you can't do it that way. You need to teach this curriculum. You have 40 minutes to teach this lesson. Your next class is coming in. Make sure that they're all, you know, managed. And so you're like micromanaging them, making sure that they're doing all their assignments or, you know, passing these standards tests. Because if you don't pass a test, then the school doesn't receive funding, you know, a certain amount of money. So it's like this whole system that definitely needs a reboot. It just needs reformation from the inside out. So I don't blame the teacher. I don't blame the principal. I don't blame, you know, I don't blame anybody. I really feel like as an entire society, we should just look at it and say, what can we do better today?
Exactly. And that was my question. And that was my kind of question. And as I started digging deeper and deeper and understanding better how the systems work here in the United States, and how restrictive and how black and white and how conforming, kind of extremely structured, rigid kind of process and rules are in place everywhere, I realized and I talked to our school boards, I reached out to the State Department of Education, to the Department of Education at the federal level. I talked to so many people and educators and education champions and reformers, alternative, different types of educations, charter systems. And everybody was concerned about it. And everybody was kind of breaking their heads. Yes, we're trying and we will. And actually, I know they all mean well. And I know we will eventually get there. But I figured it's going to be too late for my kids. I have to do something right now for them and at least some part of their generation. What can I do now, right? And the way that our society is structured, an educational system and educational culture in our society is structured, because it's driven all the way up, right? It's not just in the K through 12, it goes into college and then it feeds into the workforce, right? So I've spent in that workforce about 20 years. And I knew the deficiencies of the skills in people that I worked with, that how unprepared they were by this whole long schooling process for work in all different environments for real world. And so as I was kind of drilling down, I realized that the lowest hanging fruit was those invisible skills that are the most important, that actually light up the spark in the young kids, that work for all generations and all ages. Those social and emotional skills that not only create that lifelong learning desire, but also helps the young children be self-driven, self-motivated, organized, independent, and become better learners, and become more prepared adults who can be happy and successful working with other people, and ultimately be responsible leaders who see outside of their immediate surroundings, who can actually connect the dots and see how they fit into this whole environment and how they can impact it for the better. So to create this new generation of compassionate innovators who can reach their full potential and change the world for the better and create those long-lasting ripples of changes throughout the world.
Yes, Nuria, I definitely see this as a vital need because as a classroom teacher, my students, my former students, I quit teaching last year, and they were more interested in playing video games than they were about anything else, so they're addicted. And now with advances in technology, with virtual reality, it's harder and harder to penetrate their intention, to obtain it, to sustain it, because you're not an app that they could just start clicking at and playing and interaction happens. Your real life. And real life is very slow moving, right? So I feel like just not just obtaining their attention, which is very limited, it's very short attention span. And with each classroom that passed as the years went on, it was even more and more harder to get them to really focus. And I just noticed that, social emotional learning was seriously lacking. They were not interested in befriending each other. They were just interested in Fortnite and being the ultimate champion and winner, right? Even when they were talking about collaborating or playing together at certain time, but that's really not teamwork either. So when I try to put them in centers and pair them up and try to encourage them to work as a team, wow, you would be amazed at certain ones were successful, but there were so many that just did not know how to communicate together or to even listen to each other at all. They would just argue or shut down. If you don't listen to my idea, if you don't do it my way, then forget it, and then just kind of like cross their arms and be like, I'm not doing it. So easily to give up.
And can you imagine those people getting into the workplace?
They are getting into the workplace. And what exactly like that.
And what a big failure to the society that is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, social emotional learning, I think above everything else, above teaching this child, my son's in 8th grade and he's learning algebra. Sure, there's a place for algebra, but to prioritize it should be character first. Building up your character is the most important thing, but yet in school, that's not covered.
Right.
No?
And the key is, and you just mentioned that, right, too. So when we create those opportunities for learning and with the character education and social and emotional skills, we cannot say, okay, kids, we're done with algebra, we're done with language arts, science, let's do the social and emotional skills. They're like, huh? Yeah. So, like, where's my Fortnite? Right? Yeah. Don't speak foreign language to me. And the truth of the matter is that some teachers, and I get it, most teachers don't receive the professional learning experiences, professional development in that area much. And that's what I have encountered right now, and I've realized. But some teachers actually have that in their nature. They realize and they know how to infuse it into their style. right? So the SEL, or social and emotional learning, it's not a sterile concept that exists in isolation from the learning process. It is a learning process. It really is not a what, it's a how of teaching and learning. So the more we integrate that language, those exercises, those concepts, and as I call it, when I bring the teachers on board and I train them in our ways and philosophy, I call them, we introduce the concept maybe like in 3 minutes as a ceremony, as a conversation at the beginning of the class. And then we keep sprinkling it throughout the whole class so that, and then we end with reflection on that, on how they feel, on helping them develop that vocabulary, that SEL vocabulary, so that they can express how they feel. Because what happens at that moment, when we're not able to pinpoint and express how we feel, that makes us frustrated, right? When we cannot express ourselves, especially when those are younger children, right? Another thing is when we stop and pause, even for a second, to think about how we feel, we actually exercise mindfulness. So we live in that particular moment, connecting with ourselves. There are so many different processes that actually go on from the scientific standpoint, because we actually stop our chemical processes change in our mind when we just think about it, even for a few seconds. What it does, it actually helps us connect our brain activity with our physical process and how we feel. So this is a very deep exercise on mindfulness. And if we do it even for a few seconds or minutes every class, that's huge.
So give us an example of how we could actually like lead that. Or how do we phrase it?
So we actually launched a professional development for educators with very hands-on when they actually come in, and we give them a class so that they experience the whole feeling as the way that the students would. And some of the things could be at the beginning when, like with the little kids, for instance, we do the circle time and everybody shares what happened, right? What happened at home? What is the fun, cool thing they want to share with the class? It could also be the something that they bring from home and share, kind of show and tell type of for the little kids, right? We also do sometimes emotion charades, because for the lower elementary, especially kids like from kindergarten through third, fourth grade, we work on building their vocabulary. And we do it in a fun, kind of playing way, right? For instance, we want to do the self-awareness. So maybe like 5 or 6 different emotions that we do the charades. Then we create a mood meter. You may be familiar with the mood meter, right? And the kids, and then with age, we actually add more and more vocabulary and using maybe like an emotion wheel that has kind of the primary colors in the middle, only like 5 key emotions, remember, from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And then there is a second wheel that has more shades of each of those 5. And then there is a third layer that has even more shades of each of those emotions, right? And so, and that kind of goes with the age appropriate kind of process. So that's something that we can easily do. And for instance, if we talk about frustration, right? and perseverance, the two different things. So we're frustrated when something doesn't work, but then we don't give up. We don't give up. Why? Because I don't know that yet. I'm not able to do this yet. This doesn't work for me yet. I am not good at it yet, but I will be if I try. And then as they try and persevere, as they actually make mistakes, in our classes, for instance, everybody in our class, all the students who went through our programs, they're very familiar with the phrase, how fascinating.
I love that.
Whenever they make a mistake, they say, how fascinating. And especially now online, the more of the fascinating moments of the phrases that we hear from the kids, actually, this is one of the things that they compete on. So as they compete in different challenges, projects that they build or work on or kind of do, and if something doesn't work out, they actually also have to count the number of mistakes or failures that they made. And how do we know, right? So we tell them, depending on how many times we hear it online from them, that's how many times they actually made a mistake. And then they realize at the end, when we kind of tally up and do the reflection, that the kids who made the most mistakes actually has the best results in their project. So we can teach them and tell them, make mistakes, embrace mistakes. Mistakes are good. But if they actually see it themselves, they say, oh, so Nico made 12 mistakes and he has such an awesome structure that he actually engineered. And I only have made 4 mistakes and mine doesn't hold. So I should make more mistakes. So the more mistakes, the better my result is going to be. So they actually arrive to it on their own. We don't even have to tell them that. And I can tell you, my daughter is in the program too. And the whole summer, they were so conditioned to this how fascinating phrase that I saw her working on something in the kitchen on her own project outside of the class. Actually, like a couple of weeks, after the class ended, the whole summer session was ended, or spring session ended, I think. And she was just working on something and it was not working out for her. And she was like, how fascinating. Mm-hmm. So she just kind of murmured it out under her nose and under her breath. And it was like, she was conditioned to it, right? Mm-hmm. There was no one around. She didn't even know I was there and I heard it. But that was in her mind. She was already like, okay, that's a mistake. And I know I'm going to get through it.
I know. I could talk about mistakes in regards to, because I taught STEM. So it was a whole series of the engineering design process. And, initially everyone has this preconceived notion that a mistake is horrible, that a mistake is a failure, is equivalent to failure. But even as true scientists, you just keep experimenting and redesigning and collecting the data and seeing what went wrong, what went right, and then, just keep repeating that process. And I wish that we could, instead of, use the word mistake and replace it with something like, I'm just trying, just trying, instead of just saying, I made a mistake implying that it was a wrongdoing or something that has like a, detrimental effect over us or the outcome of whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. So I could see that, because definitely my generation, mistakes were, not something to celebrate. Like, I made 14 mistakes today, like, oh, you're a failure, Mm-hmm. So I feel like if we could just embrace that whole idea that the entire experience is a learning process. Mm-hmm. And if it took you 4 tries or 14, as long as you enjoyed the process, and you are, appreciating the outcome, like you appreciate it and you want to share the outcome, and you're like, wow, I feel wonderful about it. I think that's really the key here with social.
Absolutely. And you nailed it. I feel wonderful about it, right? It depends on how we feel about it. And I hear you. Mistake by definition, it has a negative connotation, and negative doesn't make us feel good.
Right.
Right. But when we count the number of fascinating moments, so when they call it a fascinating moment, how fascinating? Yeah. So it kind of really elevates our energetic vibration to a different level.
Just by using the word fascinating,
Yeah.
I mean, seldom do I hear students use that term at all, even adults. So I want us to shift briefly towards the teacher, because the teacher might already be sort of, I wouldn't say set in her ways, but she's comfortable teaching a certain way and maybe using different methodologies that she's familiar with. And maybe she's just doesn't know how to use these terms like innovation and, all of these up and coming terms that you would probably hear at Silicon Valley, right? And so how can we sort of, as educators, instill this fascinating kind of way of speaking or encouraging our kids to learn?
I firmly believe that teachers are angels from heavens, So they are in teaching not for money, but because of what they believe and their hearts, right? So I believe that they are, even though they're set in their ways, they're always looking for ways to make an impact. And the more impact they can make, the happier they will feel and more fulfilled they will feel. And the more tools we can give them, teachers are also lifelong learners, right? Because the person who teaches learns the most, right? So these are the people who are open to learning more than any other category of people in different professions, I believe. And
I speak for my own personal, I can't speak on behalf of all teachers, but I am an avid learner. Like I'm obsessed with it, learning, applying new skills, new strategies, new tools. Like, and when I learned something, I was like, I can't believe that, like this aha moment, like I'm totally doing this. So I get excited because it's a part of me. It's a reflection of who I am, this passion for learning. And then, but I don't see that same spark in students. Most students, I don't, so it gets me kind of sad of like, hey, isn't this fascinating? Wow, isn't this interesting? And they look at me like, no, it's not.
Right. And I think also we are all organic creatures. We humans are organic creatures. So before we can learn, we can start learning, before we can open our minds to learning, especially children, it's before they care what you know, they need to know that you care, right? So we have to really create that environment in the classroom, in the learning space, where their minds and their first hearts open. When the heart is open, their mind can consume anything. And that's something that is not being practiced and taught to the teachers. So we have so many different stories from parents that their kids, like that iSchool helped them get through the school year. And some of them were in top private schools, some of those kids. So the traditional system that was kind of stifling and focusing only on academics and only on mind without really nurturing and opening the heart first, so that the mind becomes the fertile, really kind of nurturing environment for learning. That doesn't exist, and teachers are not being taught to actually do it. We have kids who all of a sudden, like after 5-6 years in school, all of a sudden started scoring 100% on their tests. And I received letters from the parents saying that my kids said that you taught them to aim high. So they said at high school, I learned how to aim high and I can do better. And all of a sudden, they use their drive because they decided in their heart to use their mind to their full potential. It's not because kids are not capable of it. It's because they don't want to. So first, we need to create that environment. And that's something that I've learned both through science and experimentation in the classroom with hundreds and thousands of kids now in the past few years, that if we create the right environment using the social and emotional learning intentionally, not sporadically, because we all, as loving teachers, passionate teachers, we all use some of those elements, but not consistently and intentionally, right? But if we use it in a very kind of structured way, just the way we use academics, right, and plan all of those things. So if we prioritize intentionally the SEL first, everything else, all the other academic subjects will fall into place. I called SEL as a kind of a strong magnetic field that we create in the classroom. And if we are successful at creating it, then everything else clings and just exactly to the place where it should be, in the most perfect way that we can ever hope for, with the very least amount of effort. And what it does, it not only keeps the kids happy, easy to manage, motivated, but it also helps the teachers feel happy, fulfilled, and more time, having more time to teach whatever they need to teach.
I love that. It sounds wonderful. Now, as we wrap up our conversation together today, what is one thing a teacher can do right now to instill SEL in her classroom?
I would suggest to get familiar with the SEL framework by Cassell. And Cassell it's an acronym that stands for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. That kind of has the 5 main SEL competencies, that is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship building, and responsible decision-making. And so they kind of come like from the elementary school, right? Self-awareness and self-control. And then it goes into social awareness and responsible decision-making into the middle school, and kind of responsible decision-making and relationship building in the high school, kind of more focused. Of course, we focus on all of them at the age-appropriate level. But I would suggest to get familiar with that. And we have some resources of how the specific strategies in different age groups in the classrooms can be implemented intentionally, like through the PBL, the project-based learning, or the problem-based learning, through various little tools, techniques, circle times, based on the different age groups. And I'm happy to share that kind of cheat sheet that the teachers can kind of look and see how they can align it intentionally in their classroom. But first, to kind of apply it to ourselves. I think if we don't connect with it first, if we don't understand and embrace for ourselves first, it will be very hard to teach that authentically or integrate it authentically into our practice for the kids. So that's something, I know it is not maybe like this instant immediate thing. Another thing is that we launched the professional development program for educators this summer, which was very successful. And one of the main feedbacks that kind of went through the whole kind of as a whole theme throughout the summer from educators is that how fascinating phrase, because they actually experienced it hands-on in our class. So there were students in our online classroom and they're like, I'm going to use this tomorrow in my classroom. So just kind of bring in that as a fun element to embrace, because who would not want to use that, right? And for the little kids, fascinating. It's sometimes hard to sell and to say it and hard to spell it, right? So for them, we use it, how cool moment, how cool. So it's easy to say, easy to understand, remember, and spell. So that's one of the things that that the educators can actually easily integrate in their classroom.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of the Phenomenal Teacher Show today. And how can teachers find out more about you?
There are so many different resources that we actually share with teachers, and we are kind of committed to sharing more, especially now with both self-care for teachers and for their implementation in the classroom. They can connect with us through social media on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on our blog on our website at ischoolforthefuture.org. And I'm happy to share those handles and the links with you.
Great. I'll have all of those posted below on the show notes. And thank you again for being part of our show. I hope to have you back on one day. And as always, thank you to our listeners and our viewers on YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you for everything that you do. You are one of those angels from heaven. Absolutely. And thank you for helping the teachers to grow, to thrive, and improve in their practice. And I feel honored to being a part of it through your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I've actually haven't been to Hawaii, so I love looking at my screen because I'm in my office right now. So my office looks different from what I see on the screen right now when I look at it.
I know, it's like you're in vacation mode all of a sudden with that background. Okay, so I'm going to begin.